Yea, sixthly, by this the magistrate is made a church officer, having the disposal of the church's government. And not only so, but seventhly, by this he is made a church officer of the highest degree, being supreme in all causes, to whom ministers in the discharge of their ministry are subordinate. And so, eighthly, by this the church of the New Testament is made imperfect, so long as she wanted a Christian magistrate, wanting hereby a chief officer. Yea, and the apostles did amiss in robbing the magistrate of his power. Ninthly, by this the magistrate might exercise all acts of jurisdiction immediately by himself, seeing he can do it as supreme by his commissioners in ecclesiastic affairs. Tenthly, finally, by this oath the king is made the head of the church, being supreme over all persons and in all causes, unto whom all appeals and references must ultimately be reduced, even from church judicatories. Those things are only here touched. They are more apodictically confirmed above, and may be seen made out at large in Apologetic Relations, section 12. But I proceed. Number 6. It is contrary unto the solemn league and covenant, into whose place, after it was burnt, broken, buried, and rescinded, since they have remitted the subject's allegiance by annulling the bond of it, they substitute and surrogate this in its place, and therefore none can comply with the surrogation of the second, except he consent to the abrogation of the first oath. All the allegiance we can own, according to the covenants, stands perpetually and expressly thus qualified, that is, in defense of religion and liberty, according to our first and second covenants, and in its own nature must be indispensably thus restricted. Therefore, to renew the same, or to take an oath of allegiance simply, purposely omitting the former restriction, when the powers are in manifest rebellion against the Lord, is, in effect, a disowning of that limitation and of the sovereign prerogative of the great God, which is thereby reserved, and as much as to say, quote, whatever authority command us to do, we shall not only stupidly endure it, but actively concur with and assist in all this tyranny, unquote. See Naphtali, 1st edition, pages 177 and 178. Vindicated at length by Just Populi in chapter 11. By all this the iniquity of the Scots oath of allegiance and supremacy may appear, and also that of the English oath of allegiance, even abstract from the supremacy, is in some measure discovered, though it is not my purpose particular to speak to that. Yet this I will say, that they that plead for its precision from the supremacy annexed seem not to consider the full import of its terms, for under the dignities, superiorities, and authorities there engaged to be upheld, the ecclesiastical supremacy must be included, for that is declared to be one of the dignities of the crown there, as well as here, and hither it was brought from thence. And therefore those Scotsmen that took that oath there, and pled that though the oath of allegiance in Scotland be a sin, yet it is a duty to take the oath in England, seem to me to be in a great deceit, for the object is the same, the subject is the same, the duty expected, required, and engaged into is the same, and everything equal in both. Yet all this iniquity here couched, in some way comprehended in it, is some way comprehended in, and implied by, the oath of abjuration. For the civil part is imported in abjuring a declaration, for it is declaring war against the king, where it is clear he is owned as king, and all part with them that declare war against him being renounced, it is evident the abjurers must take part with him in that war, and do assist and defend him, for being subjects, they must not be neutral. Therefore, if they be not against him, they must be for him, and so under the bond of allegiance to him. The ecclesiastical supremacy is inferred from the expression of it, where some are said to serve him in church as well as in state, which implies an ecclesiastical subordination to him as supreme over the church. Number 3. The tenor of some other bonds was more smooth and subtle, as that of the bond of peace, several times renewed and imposed under several forms, but always after one strain, engaging to live peaceably, whereby many were caught and cheated with the seeming fairness of these general terms. But others, discerning their solicitousness, refused and suffered for it. This in the general is capable of a good sense, for no Christian will refuse to live peaceably, but will endeavor, if it be possible, as much as lieth in them, to live peaceably with all men, Romans 12, verse 18. That is, so far to follow peace with all men, as may consist with the pursuit of holiness, Hebrews 12, verse 14. But if we more narrowly considered such bonds, we shall find them bonds of iniquity. For first, they are covenants of peace, or confederacies with God's enemies, whom we should count our enemies, and hate them because they hate him, Psalm 139, verse 21. It is more suitable to answer as Jehu did to Jehoram in 2 Kings 9, verse 22. What peace? So long as the whoredoms of thy mother Jezebel and her witchcrafts are so many, than to engage to be at peace with those who are carrying on Babylon's interest, the mother of harlots and witchcrafts. Secondly, This cannot be taken in truth, judgment, and righteousness, because of the fallacy and ambiguity of the terms. For there are diverse sorts of peace and peaceableness, some kind of duty, some never. It must then be rightly qualified, for we can profess and pursue no peace of confederacy with the enemies of God, not consistent with the fear of God. Otherwise we cannot expect to have the Lord for a sanctuary, but for a stone of stumbling. Isaiah 8, verses 8, 12, and 14. No peace obstructing the gospel or testimony, or abstracting from the duty of the day. No peace tending to sinful security. Jeremiah 8, verse 11. No peace leading to slavish stupidity. No peace prompting to preposterous prudence in palliating sin or daubing defections with untempered mortar. No peace inconsistent with truth. They must go together. No peace that may not be followed with holiness. Hebrews 12:14. But it must be so qualified that it be in the Lord, in truth, in duty, contributing for the good of the church. Psalm 122, verses 8 and 9. And the fruit of that wisdom which is first pure and then peaceable. James 3, verse 17. Now all that know the imposers of these bonds will acknowledge that is not the peace they are seeking. Thirdly, if we further inquire into their meaning of living peaceably, and seek a determinate sense of it from their acts and actings, it is plain they mean such a peaceable living as gives obedience to their wicked laws, and is a compliance to their established courses, and it must be such a peaceable living as is opposite to their sense of sedition, rebellion, schism, etc., which they interpret every seasonable duty to be. And it must be such a peaceable living as they were presumed not to have been observant of before, and whatever it be, must be opposite to that with which they are charged as turbulent, and so contrary to all the duties of our covenanted profession, as going to meetings, withdrawing from the curates, etc., which they interpret not to be peaceable living. Fourthly, this is contrary to our covenants, which oblige us to a constant contending with, and opposition to them. Yet all this is engaged into the oath of abjuration, which abjures all war against the king, and all doing injury to them that serve him, and consequently to peace and living peaceably with them. Number 4. All affinity to which were many other bonds of regularity, frequently renewed and generally imposed, and that with unparalleled illegality and rigor, sometimes by hosts of savage Highlanders, sometimes by circuit courts, and by heritors upon their tenants, and with such unheard of involvements, that the master or heritor was obliged for himself, his wife, children, servants, tenants, and all under him, to live orderly, which in some was more bluntly expressed, in others more flatly explained, that they should keep the public ordinances, that is, hear the curates, and not go to any seditious conventicles, so they called the persecuted meetings of the Lord's people for the worship of God. And in others yet more impudently exacted, that they should not harbor, entertain, or correspond with any that went to those meetings, but discover and assist to the apprehending of them. There were several forms of them from time to time, some longer, some shorter, but all of them, first and last, were to the same sense and scope, and the most favorably worded had much wickedness in them, for, number 1, they are covenants of order, and coming under the same rule with themselves, which is nothing but their lusts and mischiefs framed into law, not according to the rule of the word of God, but the iniquitous laws of men. Number 2, they could not be taken in truth, judgment, and righteousness, for either they were ambiguous, or their plain sense obliged to manifest iniquities, to conform with all their enacted corruptions. Third, they are clear branches of covenant, which obliges to another kind of orderliness, and to form other rulers, and to take none from them in matters of God. Fourth, they are impossible and absurd, obliging masters to bind for all under them, that could neither lie in their power nor in their duty to restrain their liberty in these lawful things, and to constrain and compel their conscience to sin. Fifth, they are unnatural and cruel, obliging the takers to partake with them in their persecution of the godly. Sixth, they were engaged to hear curates, which is proved to be sin, head 1 throughout. Seventh, they were engagements to withdraw from the meetings of the Lord's people, proved to be a duty, in head 4. Yet the oath of abjuration is some way equivalent to this, in that it obliges the abjurers to renounce disorderliness in their sense, and to do no harm to the time-serving orderly clergy or laity, serving and persecuting their wicked orders. Number 5. Some other bonds of that nature, and oaths frequently put to the suffering people when taken prisoners, did require peaceableness and orderliness in this style, that they should neither tacitly or expressly condemn some risings in arms, as at Pentland, Bothwell, etc., to be rebellion against the king and a sin against God, and engage never to rise in arms against the king, or any commissionate by him, upon any pretense whatsoever. The iniquity whereof is manifest, for, firstly, this is a covenant equivalent to a league offensive and defensive with them, obliging never to offend or oppose them, nor to defend nor rescue our brethren against and from their murdering violence. Secondly, this could not be taken in truth, judgment, and righteousness, for who can tell how far that may extend upon any pretense whatsoever? This may oblige us to make a stupid surrender of our lives when the king turns so tyrannical as to send his cutthroats to demand them, or authorizes his bloody papists to massacre us. Them we must not resist upon any pretense. Thirdly, it is contrary to our covenants that allow resistance in some cases, and oblige to assist and defend all that enter under the bond thereof. Fourthly, this infers an owning of the present authority as the irresistible ordinance of God, and an obligation of living peaceably in subjection under it, disapproved above. To which I shall add a part of that foresighted letter of Mr. Rutherford's, the 63rd in number of the third part of his printed letters, which are a clear vindication of the principles and practice of our conscientious sufferers to this point. Quote, "There is a promise and real purpose, saith he, to live peaceably under the king's authority, but first, you do not so answer candidly and ingenuously the mind of the rulers, who, to your knowledge, mean a far other thing by authority than you do. For you mean his just authority, his authority in the Lord, in the maintenance of true religion, as in the covenant and confession of faith, is expressed from the word of God. They mean his supreme authority and absolute prerogative about laws, as their acts clear, and as their practice is. For they refused to such as were unwilling to subscribe their bond to add authority in the Lord, or just and lawful authority, or authority as it is expressed in the covenant. But this draft of a petition yields the sense and meaning to them which they crave. Secondly, that authority for which they contend is exclusive of the sworn covenant, so that except ye had said, ye shall be subject to the king's authority in the Lord, or according to the sworn covenant, you say nothing to the point in hand, and that, sure, is not your meaning. Thirdly, whosoever promises so much of peaceable living under his majesty's authority, leaving out the exposition of the fifth command, may, upon the very same ground, subscribe the bond refused by the godly, and so you pass from the covenant, and make all these bypast actings of this kirk, and state these years bypast, to be horrid rebellion, and how deep this guilt draws, consider." Unquote. Fifthly, this would infer, though the king should send and kill us, we must not resist nor defend our own lives. Yet being an oath against the sixth command, which enjoineth natural self-preservation, it should be intrinsically sinful. And 'tis all one to swear to non-preservation as to swear to self-murder. Sixthly, I hope to make it appear in the fifth head that this is against the practice of nations, the law of nature, and the word of God. Yet all this complex iniquity is clearly comprehended in the oath of abjuration, in terms abjuring all war against the king.